FRC hosts community programs to address topics of international interest. We thank our members, volunteers, and interns for making these forums possible since 1983, the year that two separate research groups identified a new retrovirus that was infecting people with HIV/AIDS. 1983. As a reminder, we are in a new academic year, and if you're not already renewed your ICFRC membership for 2018-19, you may do so at the registration desk towards the back. I want to acknowledge our university and community supporters, the University of Iowa's international programs, the University of Iowa's honors program, the University of Iowa Center for Public Policy, and the Stanley UI Foundation Support Organization for their financial support. And we thank today's special sponsors, Conrad Schultz, Christopher Squire, and Cartha. We also thank City Channel 4 for professionally recording our programs for cablecast on City Channel 4 or 118-2 and the UI Library's digital archives. Over 200 ICFRC podcasts can now be found on iTunes.
Thank you, Dave. It's a great pleasure to me to introduce a longtime friend and colleague, John Canady. John's a native of Jefferson, Iowa. He got his bachelor's degree at Grinnell. He then came to the College of Medicine here in Iowa City. He did otolaryngology, residency in otolaryngology, completing that in 1988, which is in fact when I first met him. He then went and did a second residency in plastic surgery at the University of Kansas. He's made a mark as in plastic surgery, professor of plastic surgery at UIHC, where he practiced, conducted research, taught. He also served as a one-year president of the American Society of Plastic Surgeons from 2008 to 2009. After that, he departed at UIHC and became medical director for Johnson & Johnson. Throughout his career, John has been deeply involved in volunteer medical services. Most notably, he's co-founder and medical team leader of Iowa Most, which is a 501c3 group that goes to underdeveloped countries to provide life-changing surgical care to children in need of medical attention. And a little anecdote here, it's notable that a student at the University of Iowa, Ethan Craig, came from Korea, was adopted by a family in Cedar Rapids. But Ethan had cleft lip and cleft palate, and it was John Canady that repaired that, and Ethan is now a medical student at the University of Iowa. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Canady.
Well, it's a wonderful opportunity to be here today. I sincerely appreciate the invitation. Chris, I think, skipped over a part of how he's largely responsible for any success I had as a mentor when I was in the Otolaryngology program, and helped me to a great extent learn about research and take on a project there. So I'm deeply appreciative of that. The talk I'm going to have today is about 30 years of doing volunteer work in developing countries, and it's kind of a best of series. So there'll be a little bit in there of the Philippines, a little bit of Guatemala, a little bit of some other places, and there'll kind of be a unifying theme, but we'll touch on the people, the places, the culture, some of the experiences, and of course the patients as we sort of move through some slides. If people have questions as I'm going through here, this doesn't need to be a lecture or a monologue. I know we're going to do questions at the end as well, but if something's not clear or something needs more explanation, please, by all means, let me know that, and we'll do our best. So that's me, and in terms of my surgical mission history, I started this in 1991, shortly after I came back to the university, and I think probably everybody in here knows Jeff Murray. He's sort of the inspiration for me to do this. He had gone on an Operation Smile trip and really enjoyed it, came back and we were having lunch at the hospital one day, and he said, this is something you really ought to think about doing. And I did, and it just caught, and I kept going. Very fortunate to have been to the Philippines, El Salvador, Ecuador, Guatemala, with a number of different groups. Operation Smile kind of began with them and sort of learned the ropes with Operation Smile. Rotoplast, and then for the last 15 years, we started a group here in Iowa City called Iowa Most. And the reason we did that was not out of dissatisfaction with any of the other groups. It was an ability for us to have some local control and be able to take local medical students, residents, and fellows. And I thought that was important because to me, was a very formative experience when I was a staff member here. And I wondered what experience that would have been if I'd have had that earlier along upstream when I was a medical student or a resident. The trips we go on last 10 days to 2 weeks, and some part of the trip is participant paid, so we all contribute to that. We've had tremendous support in the past from J&J. Actually, that's one of the things that kind of led me to J&J for a version 2.0. And specifically the Ethicon suture company within J&J. So this is a child with a cleft lip, and you can see that when he was born, his upper lip failed to form on both sides. So that's called a bilateral cleft lip. It can occur on one side or the other side or both sides. This is the most involved type of clefting of the lip, which occurs on both the right and left sides. It's repaired using local tissue rearrangement and local tissue flaps, so you don't need to do skin grafts or take tissue from some distant site. You can mobilize the tissue that's there. All the parts are there. They're just in the wrong place. And if you think of the lip is really a 3-layered structure. So if you stick your tongue up in front of your front teeth and against the back of your lip, there's kind of that slippery mucosal surface. The middle layer is the muscle of your lip. That's what lets your lip pucker up. And the top part, of course, is the skin that overlays the lip. And this is just a diagrammatic representation of how the lip repair is done, where the back part, the mucosa, is closed first after the parts are mobilized around the edge of the cleft. The muscle is brought together so there's function in the upper lip, and then the skin flaps are laid back down so that the scars look like the philtral ridges and the columella of a normal nose. So part of the trick in plastic surgery is there will be scarring as a result of the surgery, but you want to hide the scars in an area where natural breakpoints in the face would otherwise occur. Here he is fixed up. This takes about an hour and a half, and they do very well. This is an operation that's really fit for a surgical mission trip. The face is very well vascularized. It's unusual that these become infected or break down because of the blood supply that's in that area. So as we go around to these mission trips, the sites that we go to are not tourist destinations. When we go to these places, they're not places that people would generally go on holiday or vacation. And so you see things there that you don't see on places that you go on holiday or vacation. And a lot of times I get asked, well, when you do this, where do you stay? So in almost every town, in any town of any size, there's a hotel or some place to stay because people are traveling. And this is an example of a hotel in the Bicol region in the southern part of the island of Luzon in the Philippines. And it's the Grand Imperial Bzz there. The signs had seen better days. And you pull up to that and, I admit, you kind of wonder what's going to happen for the next week or 10 days. But in spite of that, I think the beauty of the Philippines and the Filipino people is you've never felt more welcome in any hotel you've ever stayed in that has a much better facade. This place really has the warmth, and the people are happy that you're there. And that carries through a lot of different aspects of the trip. It's different getting around in some of these towns too. The transportation is different. There's not subways, or there's not usually taxi cabs as we know them. There are these tricycles in the Philippines, which is a very interesting mode of transportation. And again, it sort of depicts, I think, the innovation that the Filipino people have to take things and adapt them to their own needs. And that's a real learning when you're in this environment. I mean, it's humbling to be in the presence of people that can make so much out of so little sometimes. And this is kind of a standard issue Japanese 125cc motorcycle that they've crafted a little awning cover on. And then the coup de grace is this little sidecar here. And, these are ubiquitous. They go everywhere. The issue with them is they're built kind of on a Filipino scale. So when I try to get in there, there's part of me that's sort of sticking out here. And you have to watch the right-hand turns, because if there's a light pole or something there, it can get to be complex pretty quickly. There's other lessons when you go around to these sites that are I think kind of poignant. A lot of things are poignant, but this hospital was one of the hospitals we operated in, and although it doesn't show up on the slide, there's a little plaque right here. This is in the Philippines. Who do you think built this hospital? We did. The United States Army built this hospital. And it was built for a different purpose. And, it was food for thought when we were in the OR there, thinking about the original use of those ORs, and now the fact that, they were being used to help kids, and how, in spite of the fact that the hospital had some years on it now, it was still quite functional for that purpose and could be adapted to be used in a different way than its original intent. Sort of like the hospital just over there, the hospitals we've been in the Philippines sort of never stop construction. So there's always some sort of construction going on all the time when you're there. The difference is they keep the patients in the rooms while they're doing it. And OSHA doesn't have a real big footprint in some of these places either. But it's absolutely stunning to see how hard some of the Filipino folks work that are on these jobs, because this is not, a nice 60-degree day with low humidity where it's pleasant to be outside in the sun, troweling some cement. I mean, this is, 98 degrees with 98% humidity, and he's out there working as hard as you've ever seen anybody work, trying to make things better, and that's kind of the recurrent theme. This is the intensive care unit in one of the hospitals, and it shows up a little bit on the slide. I know it's hard to read, but it's the intensive care unit because these are the what we call disposable gloves that they have washed and cleaned and now hung out on a rack to air dry to reuse. So in a lot of these places, medicine has gone to sort of single-use packaging for us. Everything comes to be used once and then thrown away, or once and then sent back for reprocessing. A lot of the hospitals in out in the provinces, they would say in the Philippines, or out in the sticks, they don't have the luxury of being able to throw those things away because they don't have a steady supply of that. So you see things like, gloves that we would normally discard, they will wash and dry and repackage and reuse. You also see the oxygen tanks here, which go along with the intensive care unit. at university hospitals, when I was there, I always thought it was a little bit of magic that if a patient needed oxygen, you could just put a hose into this little spigot in the wall and magically oxygen somehow came out of there and went to the patient. Here, if a patient needs oxygen, you have to go get one of the big bottles of oxygen and take it to the bedside. It's a more involved process, and there are no elevators in these hospitals either, which can present some challenges sometimes. Sort of like here, there's a number of different types of hospital employees that exist in the hospitals, and I cut one of the hospital employees off right here. He was moving beds into this room. Does anybody see the other hospital employee in this picture? It's I'll give you another look, right here. And what do you think the job description is for that guy? Yeah, it's a rat and mouse control. So not at all uncommon to be walking down the hallway of this particular hospital and have one of these employees come by with a big rat in its mouth, sort of heading out, to have lunch with the family. I have to say that there is a certain. I'm not a cat guy. My wife's here, God bless her, and she is. She's likes her cat, and I like the cat, but I'm more of a dog guy. But I will admit that there is a certain calm that comes over you operating when there's a cat sort of purring around your ankles in the operating room. And I broached the possibility of introducing that here at university hospitals, just to sort of keep things a little calmer in the OR, and that wasn't immediately acted on. But they're very efficient at their job. Try as I might when I'm on these missions to kind of blend in. For some reason, people seem to be able to pick me out, and it's always an amazing experience to have clinic in these places, because literally in some sites, hundreds of people will line up. So, if you think you have a busy clinic scheduled and you've got 20 or 25 people in the morning and 20 or 25 people in the afternoon, here you've got like 200 people in the day. So it's a little bit different, in terms of pace and getting through the clinic. But there's no computerized medical record, so you can make some progress with that as well. All hospitals have signs in them. When you go in a hospital, there's always signs all over the place for everything. And I was walking through one of the hospitals in the Philippines with Jimmy Sanchez. He's a fantastic plastic surgeon, good friend of mine, really a Renaissance guy, and has done a tremendous amount for his country. And I'd gotten to know him over the years, and we walked through the hospital, and I saw this sign that said blood agents are strictly prohibited inside the hospital. And in medicine, blood agents is a term commonly used to refer to the components of blood. So red blood cells, platelets, plasma, those are components of a unit of whole blood. And I said to Jimmy, I said, look, you guys are good surgeons, you're great surgeons, but everybody bleeds, and sooner or later you're going to need blood. How can they have a sign like this? And he said, well, John, he goes, it's a little different here. Blood agents doesn't mean what you think it means, because we don't have a blood bank. And if you need to get blood, you have to go across the street to the blood kiosk, the blood for sale kiosk. And fortunately, on this particular day, they had all 4 major serotypes of blood in stock. But, it wasn't... didn't leave you with a good feeling about getting a transfusion. And the blood agents refers to people who sell blood. So they don't want people actually from here in the hospital selling blood. And that was the purpose of the sign. Again, just a kind of another shot of clinic. And it's interesting when you go on these trips. Predominantly, we advertise for kids and predominantly kids with with clefts, but word gets out that there's Western medicine, in the house. And so people come with all sorts of things. And, I've diagnosed breast cancers, rectal cancers, pregnancies, all sorts of different things that come into clinic besides cleft lip and palate. And again, my office on this day was the last door on the right down at the end of this hall. And this is sort of the line that goes out of the picture this way and out of the picture down the ramp that way. And the amazing thing is, not that there's so many people that show up, but how patient they are. And, nobody's pushing, nobody's yelling, nobody's sniping. Everybody's just kind of in their place in line, and it's very calm. You just sort of work your way through it, and if something takes a little bit longer, nobody's getting too worked up about that. So although it seems like a lot, it all eventually gets done. I put this in Bill O'Lean. Certainly, I think most people in the room will remember Bill. Fantastic guy, fantastic orthodontist, and is a veteran of several of these trips with me. He was a real joy to have along, and greatly, greatly miss him. But I put it in to emphasize the fact that, everything's connected in some way. And these kids that have cleft lip and cleft palate also have tremendous dental challenges. And so being able to take somebody like Bill along was a huge step in terms of getting these kids the care that they desperately needed. And, Bill was kind of old school when it came to dentistry. I mean, he was an orthodontist, but if it was a tooth, he wasn't afraid to kind of take charge and take care of it. And he was just very, very effective in these settings. So when you do a workup in a lot of these places, there's not a lot of labs. There's not a lot of X-rays. There just isn't that sort of stuff available. On one trip, we had about a dozen kids scheduled for palate repair, and you would kind of like to make sure that they're not anemic. So I ordered a hemoglobin and hematocrit on all 12 of them, and all 12 of them came back 11 and 33. So I don't think they were all 11 and 33, but that's sort of where you are. And so what it comes down to is, are they failing to thrive? Is there some reason that they're not safe to go back to the OR? And the most important day of the mission is actually not the surgery day, it's the screening day, because you absolutely cannot have anybody sort of get past screening and get to the OR that's unable to tolerate the stress of an operation and can't recover from that. And one of the easiest ways to tell that, especially in the little kids, is simply, are they at an appropriate weight for the age that they are? And you have to adjust that a little bit, because in Guatemala, in the Philippines, a 6-month-old here weighs a lot different than a 6-month-old in the Philippines or Guatemala. But whatever a healthy local weight is for them is kind of the initial screen. Because if things do turn south, there's not a safety net like there is here. So in no hospital that I've ever been in has there been a working ventilator for kids. And this is, unfortunately, 2 preemie twins that were born in the Bacol Regional Medical Center in the Philippines. And I asked the person ventilating there if I could take this picture, because he's not a trained respiratory therapist. That's their dad. So, it really, when you see stuff like this, and I'll come back to this theme, it does a lot to reset your knobs about the problems you think you have when you go on these trips. I mean, my wife sort of calls this the no problems tour when I do this, because at least for a while when I come back, there's sort of no problems. The little things aren't the problems they were when you stepped on the airplane to go. A couple of representative pictures of kids. We'll just go through a few patients. This is a little guy named Anderson, came in with a unilateral cleft lip. Here he is fixed up, and he has a little bolster on his nose because you can see the cleft lip. Not only is there a gap in the lip, but there's also a deformity of the cartilage of the nose, and you can reposition that a little bit at the time of the initial surgery and get an initial nasal correction that helps with the symmetry there. As I said, things come in other than clefts. This is a burn scar contracture. In a lot of developing countries, there's a lot of open fires and a lot of open burning that's used for trash disposal or cooking, and kids being kids are out messing around in that and fall in. It's interesting after you've trained in medicine in the U.S. and think you've seen like what there is to see, and you go on these trips and you see things that you just would never ever see in this country. This becomes very difficult to correct because it's been that way for a long time, and he ends up with kind of a fused elbow joint. You see a lot of keloids. This is called a keloid. It's a benign scar tumor, if you will. It's excessive scarring beyond the original wound. It happens more in people with a darker skin tone, and it happens more in wounds that fester when they heal. So both of those unfortunately qualified in this young girl. Once it's established, for whatever reason, it's not well understood, it's difficult to treat. If you excise it, it tends to recur. It's not a malignancy, but it does just tend to locally recur. This is a little guy that's, came into clinic, and you will see, particularly in certain areas of the Philippines, you'll see a number of these kids screening in clinic. This is called a meningoencephalocele. So when he was born, there was a failure of fusion of the bony plate at the root of his nose, and he's got a herniation of the covering of his brain, some of the spinal fluid into this skin pouch that is right there. This, although it looks, stunning when you see it, it's not necessarily a huge operation to correct. When I used to operate with Dr. Meneses, I mean, this was something that we would, have no worries about undertaking. The difficulty is where these kids are. And so one of the, hardest things about these trips is when the kids come into clinic, there's kids you can help and there's kids you can't help in these sort of settings. And you have to be careful where you draw that line, because if you try to help somebody that's really beyond the capability of the setting you're in, you can end up with an outcome that nobody wants. Fortunately, a lot of these kids will, we would take their names and reach out to various aid organizations and try to get them hooked up, and some of them will make it to the United States and get corrected. So there's always hope. Clefts tend to run in families, and this is a group of siblings and that are getting ready to have their surgery the next day. This is mom. The hospitals don't provide meals, so mom's kind of got supper going there a little bit, but there is some genetic influence on clefting, but it's not totally a genetic issue. Anytime you're in any of these settings, there's always differences in language, differences in culture, and you have to respect that. You have to understand that, just because you say something doesn't mean it's understood, certainly doesn't mean it's going to happen. And you get reminded in different ways of those differences in language. This was in the door of my operating room on one of the trips, and it says, "Please don't bang the door. The surgeon is disturbed." So I don't think they meant, I don't know what they meant. It's also, the culture part of this is amazing as well, because different parts of the world see things very different than we do, and they see the way we do stuff as odd, and the stuff that they do as normal. And this, again, this is in the Bacol Regional Medical Center in the Philippines, and I was walking around after the cases were done one day, and I walked into this room. It's kind of the clean room where they're getting instrument sets prepped and getting supplies ready for the next day in the OR. And the thing that struck me about this was that at no point in my medical training did somebody tell me, go get some more suture, it's just to the right of the shrine. And in this place, there really was kind of a melting together of the spiritual and the secular, and they saw nothing unusual about that. And the amazing manifestation of that was that they really felt, sometimes against what seemed to us overwhelming odds, that things were going to be okay. So no matter what they were faced with, the people in this particular area that we took care of in this hospital just had this abiding faith that, things were going to be okay. No, you would talk to them about things that, could potentially go wrong in the OR, and no, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. Don't worry, doctor. It'll be okay. Okay, that's good to know. In the times that I've done this over the various years, things have moved from sort of me doing the surgery to sort of cheering on the local surgeons that we work with and trying to get them to embrace doing this surgery on their own. And in point of fact, they are well capable in most of the places I've been of doing this. They just don't have supplies and stuff to do it. And they don't have the monetary resources to put on big mission type of things to treat a number of kids at the same time. So one of the most rewarding things I've done is work with these local surgeons, and it's they've taught me a lot. They have their own little tricks. They don't have all the instruments. They don't have all the gadgets. They don't have, all the stuff. And when you watch them operate, there's a real efficiency of motion, a real efficiency of equipment, and it's very educational. Not all operations happen in the operating room. The older people, you can do a cleft lip repair under local. So like when you go to the dentist, you can use local anesthesia and just cause that area of the midface to be numb by injecting the medicine around the edge of the lip and then doing some strategic nerve blocks. And unlike here, it's not uncommon to see people that are in their teens and, as you'll see in a few slides, even older, coming into clinic with unrepaired clefts. So in order to save the operating beds with general anesthesia for the children, we'll oftentimes do the adults in the hallway. In this particular hallway, while I was doing this lip, there were bones being set, there were babies being delivered. There was like a full service hospital in this hallway in this hospital in Guatemala. And they actually call this surgery a la Guatemala in this hospital, which just means surgery, in the hallway. The people you meet on these trips make the trip. And it's funny with the advent of social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, all of these sort of things, it's kind of come full circle. This gentleman's name is Perry Piano. He was my scrub tech 2 years in the Philippines. After the first year, he had this watercolor done and gave it to me as a present the second year. I don't know how you say thanks for that, because that's probably a month's salary for him to actually have that done. And I just heard from him 2 weeks ago on that LinkedIn Messenger that he'd sort of come across my name. And how cool is that? That here I hadn't heard from him in 20 years probably, and up he pops on social media. I like to leave a little of the Hawkeyes behind when we're in these hospitals. This was a hospital in Cavite. It was run by an order of sisters that were also trained as nurses, and it was an amazing hospital because there really were little miracles that just sort of happened on a fairly regular basis when you went around the hospital. And the sisters were really a happy, jovial lot, and excellent nurses as well. As Chris talked about when we started here, I think one of the real satisfying things for me on these trips has been the ability to take people in training here. And I think that the medical students sort of embody and personify that, because they're at a point in their training where I think an experience like this helps understand the spectrum of medical delivery in the world and sort of the difference between, training here and training someplace else. And when people say, I don't have anything here, this sort of puts some of that into perspective. So it's nice to be able to have the medical students along. It's nice when one of the medical students is your oldest son, and that makes it a kind of a special trip that year as well. The Ethan Craig that Chris talked about was another very special medical student to me. I met Ethan when he was a baby, and he'd been adopted, as Chris said, by a very, very nice family in Cedar Rapids. He went through his surgeries here. He went through medical school here. He's now off at his ENT residency, but last trip to Guatemala with Iowa Most, he went along as one of the medical students, and we did a cleft lip together. So it was a lot of fun and kind of a stars aligning moment in the OR, finishing off with a handshake at the end of the successful operation. And Ethan's just a great guy and is going to be a great doc. So we'll close up here with just a couple of last patient stories. This is kind of my indoor record in terms of age for a cleft lip. This gentleman was 83 years old when he came in, and he came into clinic sort of by accident. And you can't do these trips and come away from it and not believe to some extent in fate. And I'll talk about that again in a minute. But this guy came into town to get some money he was owed. He worked on a cattle farm way up in the hills in Guatemala. And that's unfortunately the case of a lot of people that have clefts in these developing countries, is they don't interact with society. So getting their lip fixed is not just about how they look. It reintroduces them into society. The kids don't get teased as much anymore. They go back to school, and it is life-changing for them in that way. It's also life-changing if you're 83 years old. So he came in and was asking about what the setup was to get his lip fixed. And we told him, and he was a class act. He said, I don't want to take a spot from a kid. And so we explained to him, we also have this hallway. And he said that, well, that would be all right. And so we ended up doing him in the hallway. And when he was done, it was really funny. I mean, he was a very shy, sort of reserved guy when he came in, wouldn't look you in the eye. And he was kind of dancing with the nurses on the ward before he walked out of the hospital. And John, you remember, yeah. So people ask what my most memorable patient was, and this is my most memorable patient. It may seem funny because we're talking about kids. This is not a kid. He's a guy that came in on the very last day of one of the trips in the Philippines. And the story goes that at the end of the mission, excuse me, somebody always shows up when we're done because they've just heard about it. And, we're in the middle of trying to pack things up. And in fact, in this day, I was back in the back and we were putting equipment away. And one of the nurses comes back and says, John, there's this guy out front. He's not a kid. He's an older guy. He's got a bilateral cleft lip. He's very, very persistent about getting his lip done. He's not a jerk, but he's walked 12 hours to get here, and he really, wants to get something done. And I said, well, this happens every year. Big believer that you should never take away somebody's hope or somebody's dignity. And you can tell them that, we'll be back next year, I hope. And, we can help them then, but the ORs are torn down. They're we're out of stuff. We're out of suture. We're out of anesthesia gas, and everything's already pulled apart. It's going into boxes. So she left, and I wouldn't have thought about it if but for an occurrence of events that followed that. And about 5 minutes later, one of the other nurses came back and said, there's this guy out front, and he's not a kid, he's an older guy, he's got a bilateral cleft lip, he walked 12 hours to get here, he's really persistent about getting something done about his lip. He's not being a jerk, but he just really wants to get his lip fixed. And I said, well, I think that's, who Mary was here about a few minutes ago. You just got to tell him we're done, we're out, and hopefully, we'll get him next year, get his name, and I'll keep it, and, we'll make him first of the list next year. But there's just no way I can see we can do it now. So we're back to packing boxes. And about 5 minutes later, I looked up, and both the nurses are standing there. And they said, John, this guy's just not going to take it from us. So if you want him to leave, you're going to have to go have a chat with him. And certainly I'm not above that, and I'd rather do that than pack boxes anyway. So I started to put stuff down, and as I'm starting to walk up front, who should walk by? No less than Andy Parsons, who was my anesthesiologist. Andy was an active duty Navy guy at the time. And if you've never roomed with a guy who's active duty naval officer, I would recommend that just for the experience, because when you're in a room with them, if there's a hanger for clothes, his clothes will hang to the millimeter of half of that rod. And you don't have to measure it. If there's a shelf, he will take up exactly half of that shelf. But just to say, a very, very squared away guy. And he walked by, and he goes, "Hey John, is it okay if I tear down our operating room now?" And I kind of looked at him and said, I thought you'd already done that. We got all this stuff we're putting in boxes. And he goes, "Nah, it was just bedlam back there." He said, I went out and took some pictures, but he goes, "I've been on a lot of these trips with you. I will not slow you down. I'm going to go tear it down right now." So at that point, you kind of realize that you've just been sent like 3 very distinct messages that your job in the big picture of the day is to fix this guy's lip. And if you don't, probably the next message is a big lightning bolt that comes down, just reduces you to a pile of ash. So I looked at Andy and I said, "Andy, there's this guy out front, and he's not a kid, he's an older guy. He's got a bilateral lip. He's walked 12 hours to be here, and he's very persistent, not a jerk." And I said, "The way this is working out, I'm pretty sure he hasn't eaten or drank anything in the last 6 or 8 hours. So why don't you go grab him and put him to sleep, and somehow magically, I just think stuff's going to appear, and we're going to do his lip." And, Andy kind of looked at me and went, "Okay." So he went and got him and put him to sleep. And the thing that makes this most memorable is that is he was going to sleep, and we're back in the OR. There's a lot of commotion on these trips where people, are coming and going, and it's noisy. And at this point in time, there was just this gentleman, myself, Andy, and a Filipino scrub nurse. So it was very quiet, and you had time to think and reflect. And before I put on gloves to fix his lip, I looked through, we just had one piece of paper was his chart. And I looked, and he was 40 years old. And so how old was I at the time I did him? Yeah, I was 40, because this all fits together in the end. And, I looked at him as we were doing the operation, and I thought, I got all these things that bug me. And here's this guy that's the same age I am, lives on the same planet I do, and he can't even get his lip fixed for 40 years. So, what does that mean in terms of scale about my problems? And after about an hour, he got fixed up and kind of woke up and sat on the edge of the table for a while and kind of started walking home. And I will never see him again, but I will never forget him. So we do different things on the trip. We do screenings, we do ear surgery, we do tooth extractions. We kind of take care of all the stuff we can that walks in the door. We try to support the local first responders. We try to leave things for the hospital that's there. And the team, comes together in a different way. There's slightly different people each year. But, I think at the end of these trips, when you look at the older gentleman and this guy that was 40 and all the kids that we take care of, I think sort of the overriding theme is, and that I believe anyway, is if you've been fortunate to have good fortune in your life, I believe there's a price tag attached to that, and you need to give some of that back in some way. And it's if you're a plastic surgeon, you can show dramatic before and after pictures, but most kids don't die of cleft lip and palate. Most kids die of simple types of diseases and sanitation that anybody can really contribute to. And you don't really need to go overseas to have an impact either. In any town of any size in this country, there's ways to volunteer and ways to make an impact. And I think, what I've found over the time of doing this, and people that have gotten involved in doing this have found as well that once you do it, it's kind of hard to stop doing it. And it's one of those things that the more you try to give away, it seems like you get more back in return. So the math on that ends up working out a little bit funny. I guess that's it. But my challenge would be, before the tornado hits or what's ever going to happen, I would just say, please consider in your life taking some time and giving back, because everybody in this room has the ability to do it. And even with some very short trainings, you can be involved in medical missions. Even if you have no medical background, there's logistics and other types of things that need to be done to make these trips successful. So thank you very much for your attention today. I've really enjoyed it.
Okay, so a straightforward, practical one for a surgeon. Do most cleft palates require multiple surgeries? When you do a surgery, what coordination is in place for follow-up? That's a
good one. Those are good questions. So they do require multiple surgeries. The thing about kids is they grow. And when you do the surgery and they're young, the face, if you look at the facial dimensions of a kid, they really do expand significantly as the child grows. So there generally do need to be staged surgeries. We have had, particularly in Guatemala, because we've gone back to the same hospital for 15 years, we've kind of developed our own little clinic down there. So we have people that come back for staged surgeries there. We've, in every site I've been to, we've had tremendous relations with local surgeons and local pediatricians who follow and take care of the kids in between. And they really deserve all the credit, because they do that day in and day out all year long for no money. And they're every bit as much of a team as we are. And it's a rewarding thing to go back and see them every year.
Okay, a couple of similar questions here. Okay, this says great talk, which it was. Is there any more known about causes of cleft? And let me combine that with the other one. Are there animal cases, for example?
There are animal cases. There have been animal models developed of clefting. In terms of genetics, Jeff Murray is really one of the world's leaders in the genetics of orofacial clefting. Once you have a cleft in a family, it becomes slightly more likely to have an additional child with a cleft in the family. And the more children you have, so if you get more than one, it continues to become more likely. The incidence of clefting without any other clefts in the family is roughly 1 in 800 to 1 in 1,000. It varies around the world. Caucasians in North America are kind of in the mid-range. The Asians and the Pacific Rim islands are about twice as frequent as it is here. There's probably some other overlays besides genetics that may involve dietary deficiencies, vitamin deficiencies. Folate and vitamin B6 are two that have been identified and looked at. And of course, folate is also known to be an actor in neural tube defects in spina bifida. So it's not out of the question that it would have some role in oral facial clefting as well.
Okay, couple of very practical questions. Is security an issue in these hospitals? How is it managed? And then who deals with political situations?
So the political situations run, kind of run the gamut, and that is, one of the trickier things, because that's in play. If there's, more than one person, there's going to be some sort of political dynamic going on in the group, and there's obviously sometimes different relationships between some of the doctors in town and some of some of their colleagues. You learned over the years to navigate that, and I will say that with very few exceptions, people do kind of tend to pull together for the kids. I mean, when you bring that sort of effort in to help their kids, the political stuff in the country sort of goes away from the team, and in terms of getting support from local government officials. Lately in Guatemala, we've partnered with the Rotary Foundation down there. Has been a great partner, and a lot of the Rotary guys that have helped out with logistics are very well known and respected in their local communities, and are able to cut through a lot of that. Yeah.
And the last question's rather a lovely one. Does the clinic have mirrors for patients to see themselves post-surgery? Those must be precious reactions.
Yeah, they really are. You can't stay dry-eyed in a lot of the recovery rooms, because that's one of the first things the nurses will give them when they're awake. And it's hard to know who has the biggest reaction. I think a teenage girl looking at her cleft lip repair for the first time is pretty dramatic. But an 83-year-old guy looking at his cleft lip repair for the first time is pretty dramatic too. So I don't know who wins that. I think at the end they all win that, but that is a very dramatic reaction. That's a good question.
Okay, thank you, John. This is the conclusion of our program. I want to give a big thank you to John Canady for his presentation. Thank you. I also want to thank sponsors, the University of Iowa's International Programs, University of Iowa Honors Program, University of Iowa Public Policy Center, and the Stanley UI Foundation Support Organization for generous support, and also today's special sponsors, Conrad Schultz and Cartha. And we thank City Channel 4 for making our programs available to viewing audiences. Now, this is the big moment, as a small token of our appreciation, we want to present you with the coveted Iowa City Foreign Relations Council mug.
Oh my God.
There.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. We're adjourned.
All right.